Our theme this year is, I think, a very apt one, and it is value-centered leadership. There are increasing pressures these days to cut costs and to demonstrate profitability month after month, quarter after quarter, year after year. And at times like this, values sometimes are in serious danger of being compromised. And it's very important to remember what role they play in our business decision-making. Leaders have to consider human values, trust, care, respect for individual needs. They have to be an essential part of an organization's mission and have to be considered in setting objectives and strategic direction. And I have to say that I am very inspired by the value-centered leadership and support that all of you in the GSM community provide and demonstrate daily in your lives. You are inspirational to your organizations, to our school, and to the community at large. You play so many roles. So let me tell you about our speaker today. Janis Heaphy grew up with newspapers. She read them daily, and she says that she relied upon them as a trusted friend. She's now the president and publisher of the Sacramento Bee and is a leader in the nation's third largest newspaper company, the McClatchy Company. McClatchy is a bit older than the GSM. They just celebrated their 150th anniversary, which when you think about businesses, there are very few that, that endure to that length of time without having been merged or gone under or been divided. But the McClatchy Company is a very impressive 150 years old in the newspaper business. The Bee is the region's leading media outlet, but it publishes not only a daily paper, but maintains 3 premier websites. And I logged on this morning, and there's a nice UC Davis MBA banner ad. So we're partners together. The Bee's commitment to the community is truly outstanding. They support at-risk children, education, and literacy through book drives. They give financial support from the company, and they profile stories of people in need. They are very strong members of our community. And Janis Heaphy has more than 30 years of experience in the newspaper business. She started first at the LA Times, where she eventually became the Senior Vice President of Marketing, Advertising and Marketing, before joining the Bee nearly 10 years ago. Under her leadership, the Bee's journalistic efforts were recognized with Pulitzer Prizes in both 2005 and 2007. 2 in the last few years, and the paper had won only 3 other prizes in its 150-year history. So Janis is doing something right there. She is a widely respected member of our community and was recently honored by the Greater Sacramento Urban League, and she serves on several boards, including my Dean's Advisory Council board. Janis is going to speak to us today on value-centered leadership. So please join me in welcoming Janis Heaphy.
Thank you very much, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I have so much respect for Nicole Biggert and what she has produced here with the UC Davis Graduate School Management in the way of quality and expertise. And we're very lucky to have this system here in the region. And it's a delight to know you, Nicole, and sometimes in our lives, with our work lives, we're thrown in association with people we may or may not like them, but we're working with them. And in this case, I truly enjoy you as a person as well. So it's my pleasure to be here. Congratulations to the UC Davis Graduate School Management for the #6 ranking by the Wall Street Journal for the Internet, Technology, and Telecommunications. I think that's wonderful to go up into that category, and it helps, I believe, to distinguish you very much so in the country for others that may pursue what you're pursuing, which is a graduate education. So I'm really happy and very, very proud of that. I wanted to talk to you today about something that is really not found in textbooks. It's what I call value-centered leadership. It's a style of leadership that I have a great passion for and that I've practiced throughout my career. And I believe it's a style that's needed now more than ever at the Sacramento Bee during this time of what I would call media transformation. As Nicole said, the Bee is the flagship of the McClatchy Company, and we are now the third largest newspaper company in the United States, which is a wonderful honor for all of us that work there. As the Bee's publisher, I've had the good fortune to have a career that's very much rewarding to me in many ways. In particular, the intellectual engagement, the community involvement, and the public service mission that I've enjoyed. At times, this role as publisher of the newspaper has put me on a national stage. In fact, there are very few women publishers of newspapers of this size in the nation. So I'm very proud. I have to admit, I don't mind it. I don't mind the high wire act that it can put me on, and actually the attention that it sometimes comes with it as well, because I've earned my stripes. And it's great, due in great part to this values-centered leadership. And it's what I think of as 3 personal calls to action over the course of my life. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about a little bit today, is what is this values-centered leadership and what I call calls to action in life. Before I do that, I think it would be helpful if I take a few minutes and just talk to you about the context of our business. I think you can probably appreciate the ebb and flow that the newspaper industry is in right now if you're doing any reading about us in any of your choices of media. I hope my story will, in the end, however, today, leave you with a conviction. And this conviction is that if you are constantly mindful of the values that you hold, you will have the wisdom to guide your management decisions at any time, but especially when it's hard, especially when you're facing rapid change. I'm guessing that many of you have heard about the turmoil in our business. I'd like to start by asking you just for a minute how it is that you receive your news and your information. So with just a quick show of hands, how many go to the television for their news? Okay, and how about radio? The internet? How about a printed copy of the newspaper? Okay, I don't have to kill myself today. That's good. I'm glad of that. I expected a variety of responses in this room, and it really illustrates the challenge we do face in our industry. Newspaper companies are moving from being a provider of news through a traditional print product into a fast-paced, 24-hour, 7-day-a-week world of delivering news in ways to audiences who demand control. I mean, that's you. You want it when you want it, how you want it, where you want it. That audience, you among them, decides where, when, and how you will get your news and information. I first want to tell you that I'm a passionate believer in the value of journalism in our society. I've worked purposefully with the Bee's editors to emphasize and to increase our investigative journalism in particular, so that our paper can be a better watchdog in our community. Public service journalism is our core mission. And when our news organization does that right, I'm convinced we are fulfilling our role in society. That role is in a society that's a democratic society, a society where citizens are equipped really to be partners in decision-making in their everyday lives. Now, here's the business reality behind the Bee's vital mission. Our journalism, this very important aspect of a democratic society, is supported by what we call advertising. Just as consumers like you are showing that you have a change in your patterns and your behaviors regarding your media choices, advertisers are responding with choices of their own. They want more options, they want less expensive options, they want them targeted, and they want a much better return on their investment. So newspapers are facing the challenge of dealing with these declining revenues in display and classified advertising, which is really the foundation of our business. While the news organizations are building our internet business, The revenues so far have not been growing fast enough to make up for the declines that we're facing on the print side. And I look at this almost as if business is like nature. It's subject to cycles of change and cycles of renewal. At the Bee, unfortunately, we're in an evolution moving, again, from the newspaper business. I shouldn't say unfortunately. It is what it is. Moving from the newspaper business to the news and information business. So what persists, what is our core asset, is content. That's it. That's what we have to offer. That's what distinguishes us. And as Nicole said, we've been around for 150 years, and it is our anniversary this year. We've been resilient, and we expect to continue to be so, and we will refine our financial model. And we will do this while we support our core work. It's just that at this moment in the nature's cycle, it feels more like winter than spring. But I am confident we will return to spring again. In these turbulent times, I find that it's important to have a very calm center. And I have for you today what I hope will be keys to living the kind of professional life that ensures fulfillment and meaning. And as much as I depend on the insight contained in textbooks, like all of you do, I'm sure, and business case studies that you will be learning in your graduate program, you probably won't find the career advice I'm going to try to give you today in those textbooks. Obviously, you have felt the call to pursue your education, to become skilled and intelligent decision makers in business, and I have a lot of respect for that. I'm certain beyond a doubt that what you are learning here at the UC Davis Graduate School of Management will serve you well as you face external and internal constraints on your businesses. When you leave here, you will have the expertise to oversee a business. That'll be obviously a very important goal of yours. And what I hope to offer you today is an additional benefit to that. Learning something that perhaps goes beyond what you'll learn here, and it's really something that I've learned through, frankly, age and experience. When I look back over my life, I know that I was moved by what I'll call 3 different calls. The first call was a call to self-direction. The second is the call to service. And the third is the call to courage. All have helped shape me, and all have helped shape my pursuit of what I call values-centered leadership. Just to define it simply, values-centered leadership, in my view, means using your core values to guide your decisions and your actions. For me, those values are 4 values: compassion, passion, honesty, and integrity. I'm a minister's daughter. I had an unusual upbringing in this regard. My parents, and particularly my father, were role models in the way they emphasized and lived lives of strong moral and ethical behavior. The expectation for conscience, for doing the right thing, was practiced and exercised every day of my life in our household. As a Presbyterian minister, my father modeled a life of service to the greater good, to the community and to the church. And when I was a young girl, I imagined a predictable life. Women at the time typically became nurses or teachers. That was really it. I picked teaching. My call to self-direction came one day during a gorgeous sunset amid some rolling hills in southern Ohio. My friend Karen came to me. She was all excited that day. She had bought a house in 7 Mile, Ohio, where we both were teachers. Karen had it all planned. She'd live in the house for 30 years, and then she'd own it outright. Karen would teach there all her life. Wasn't it perfect? Her words served as a fire alarm screeching through me. That could end up being my life, too, I thought. And for me, that wasn't enough. It just didn't fit. I was bound for something else. I didn't know what, but I was willing to take a risk, to follow my instincts, to create a life that would be not conforming to what everyone else expected. Thanks to the bank's willingness to increase my car loan, I literally had not more than $120 in my pocket. I loaded up my 1969 blue Mustang with some clothes, a lot of books, and my bicycle. My girlfriend Robin, she had a yellow Camaro. She loaded hers up with her English sheepdog and a couple of pup tents. We had walkie-talkies to chat back and forth during the 6-day journey. It was 1975, after all, way before cell phones and Blackberries. Off we went. We left Cincinnati, Ohio, bound for Los Angeles. Now, I had no job. I had little money, but I did have a passion for life and a sense that it could be more than what waited for me in 7 Mile, Ohio. Initially, I was a waitress. I worked at an airline as well, as I was finishing my master's credits at UCLA, and I have to tell you, it wasn't easy. I wore the same sandals 24 months because I was too poor to buy any new shoes. I had a loan from Nixon, and it was such that if I taught for 3 or 4 years after graduating, it would be a very low 2 to 3% loan. It took me 7 years to pay off, by the way, and I burned the little book when it was done. At one point, I had to decide whether to go back to Ohio to work on my doctorate. And then, this was after I'd completed my master's. I opted to stay in LA. Who knew what could happen? But California was my call to self-direction. And you know what? Everything ultimately fell into place. I landed a job at the LA Times. It was not in the newsroom, where I'd hoped to be hired as a writer. After all, my degree was in English education, but instead I ended up in the advertising department. I discovered something about myself. I was good at sales, but more importantly, I was good at management. In 1976, I had the honor of getting a plaque for Salesman of the Year. That's right, that's what it said, salesman. A woman had never been recognized, and I guess the trophy shops didn't have the vaguest idea how to make a plaque celebrating a businesswoman's achievements. No matter, I kept delivering results, and I came to learn that I wanted to be in charge, and I wanted to move a large organization forward to have an impact of consequence. I ultimately came to lead the division that generated $850 million in advertising revenue. Together, we pushed the LA Times to #1 in newspaper sales in America, remarkably, in those years anyway, ahead of the New York Times. After years of building a track record of performance, I was appointed the first woman officer of the LA Times executive team, which means I was now among a handful of top executives running the newspaper. Now, who would have thought a crazy road trip with pup tents, walkie-talkies, and an English sheepdog would lead to that? It can happen if you're open and if you have confidence in your ability to take risks and set your own course. Following the call can lead to anything from zooming off on a cross-country road trip to creating a startup company in your garage with nothing more than an idea, a laptop, and a wireless connection. The second call to me is the call to service. To understand how the call to service works for me, it helps to know what my life has been like at the Sacramento Bee since I arrived as publisher in 1998. The Bee had never had a publisher in its history. When McClatchy recruited me, they did so with the goal of putting a publisher in charge of the news and the business operations in total. This is consistent with how newspapers in America are organized. I had to lead that transition. From the beginning, I understood that I could not go it alone. I count on relationships. And like any good leader, I am mindful of traits that are important: the ability to hire talented colleagues, to give voice to goals, to vision, to delegate, to identify strategy, opportunities, stumbling blocks, and to persuade others to follow me. As I mentioned earlier, necessary decisions in these past couple of years are anything but clear-cut in a time of uncertainty. In fact, I find myself relying often on the words of Charles Darwin, and I quote, "It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor is it the smartest. It is the ones most responsive to change." But changing this industry? There's no formula. There's no magic bullet. I coined neither the terms value-centered leadership nor inclusive leadership, but those terms describe what I've been trying to do my whole career. I am not a command and control authority figure, but I do have an iron will and a determination to execute final decisions in service to the company's success. I rely on working in concert with my top advisors to plot the course for how to move the business forward together. And while I have always stressed communication throughout the company, that's right, communication in a communication company, I find that in uncertain economic times, my inclusive leadership style is more important than ever. I tell my executives repeatedly that you cannot over-communicate, especially in difficult economic times. That's why last spring, I abandoned our traditional meeting that we hold every year across the street in the Eleanor McClatchy Auditorium, and instead I held a series of small, intimate meetings throughout the building. My goal was to make clear the industry challenge and the fiscal discipline we would all need to navigate a really fierce whitewater situation. If you think about the call to service and value-centered leadership, you don't see leadership through the lens of self-interest. Why does a person do the right thing? Why does a leader do the right thing? For me, it can't be only about the self. You have to act on behalf of a higher interest, the common good. In my job, I'm protecting the interests and values of what's right for the company. And I keep my concentration focused on serving the company's values and goals versus any particular executive who might have a political or turf goal. And I am in service of the community because our newspaper has much it can do to improve upon the lives of the region's people. Now, the third call for me is the call to courage. The source of courage is there. It's inside of you. I've been this way for as long as I can remember. I have this courage to stand up and say what I think if something is unfair or unjust or just plain wrong. My father taught me this. He said, there's nothing more important than doing the right thing, no matter how hard, no matter what the cost. This means at work, I don't hesitate to call people on the carpet if I think they're putting the company at risk. Even back in college when I was a freshman, I had this call to courage. It was 1970. The war was raging in Vietnam. National Guard troops had fired on students at Kent State. I was at Ohio State then, before I transferred to and graduated from Miami University of Oxford, Ohio. Students protested, tanks rolled in, law enforcement carried tear gas, and students had a hard time making it through the chaos to class. There was an event at the Ohio State Library where the administration and faculty wanted to speak to students. I was in the back of a big room filled with people. The students grew louder and louder and out of control. They started to physically push against the speakers. I couldn't stand it. I hurried forward. I went to the front of the room. I looked out at all those people and I shouted, "Stop it. You're not going to do this. These faculty came to try to help us understand what's going on in this war." All of a sudden, it looked like I'd taken my cast and I'd cast my lot rather with the faculty. But I'd really cast my lot with my father's teaching. Do the right thing, no matter what the cost. The call to courage is ever present for me, but it has never been harder to answer than 3 years ago when I lost my husband, Max, to cancer. Death and grief can take you to a place you've never been before. You don't know who you really are until that moment when someone you love dies and you must cope with that loss. When you are called to face life's difficulties, whether at home or at work, and you already have been and you will again, you have a reservoir of strength and wisdom and courage to make it through the worst of times. It's imperative to maintain a sense of proportion about your career and your life. Yes, it's obvious that you need passion for what you do and for the decisions you make as a leader, but you would also benefit from a very strong dose of detachment about the job. It will be your role, sometimes for an exhausting 60 or 70 hours a week, but the job is not your life. I want to close by telling you a story about a walk I took once across the bridge on the American River. I love to walk, and I walk nearly every day, outside in the morning. On this particular morning, I received a gift, honestly, from out of the blue, and I want to share it with you. It's become my creed. Here are the words: learn, love, give, accept. Be honest, be grateful, be present. Sometime afterward, in my job at the Bee, I learned that our political columnist, John Jacobs, had cancer. I went to his office to express my sadness. I listened as he talked about his illness. At some point, I grabbed a little scratch pad and I wrote what I told him was my creed. Learn, love, give, accept. Be honest, be grateful, be present. I handed it to him, and I let him know that I was available to talk with him at any time. Some months later, John died. At his funeral, I was taken aback when his wife rose to speak about her husband, and she mentioned me. In the course of her talk, she said that John was amazed that his publisher had come to him one day and given him words that were her creed. My scrap of paper, that little scrap of paper, ended up tacked to John's wall by his bed, she said, and he looked at it every day until his last day. Now that's a story about the mysterious connection among human beings that goes far deeper than the workplace, far beyond a connection linking a boss and an employee. It is true that in my life I have done the hard work of progressing in business. I wound up with an impressive title that denotes in our society power and authority. But I have learned that management is and always has been about people and how you lead them from your core values. And perhaps the greatest lesson I have learned is that it is the manner in which I nurture all of those human connections that brings fulfillment and meaning to my life, and secondly, to my work. John's funeral that day reminded me how powerful we can all be if we just choose to live the lives we were meant to live and to reach out to others always. Who knows what the ripple effect might be? Learn, love, give, accept. Be honest, be grateful, be present. That's my wish for you. Thank you.
So with the recent front page acquisitions we've seen in the industry, I was hoping that you could talk for a minute on what you see are some of the risks and benefits to consolidation in the industry you're in, faced maybe on a smaller scale by the local papers, and maybe even some thoughts on how it would affect investigative journalism.
I'm sorry, what was the second half of that last?
Maybe with some thoughts on the effects towards investigative journalism as well, the investigating reporting.
So I believe the question is about the impact of the consolidation and so on. I think that there are economies of scale that you can imagine in areas such as human resources and systems and technology, where we can benefit from consolidation, no question about it. And certainly that's what we're doing at McClatchy. Also shared resources and new learning that exists when you merge companies. Huge benefit in that regard. In terms of those would be the benefits. As far as some of the things that aren't positive, I think that, you cause, when you have something like a merger, you cause different cultures to come together, and so people are in a transformational phase, and it's somewhat distracting. It can be distracting. I think that it goes back to what I was trying to say in the beginning of this talk, is that I think we're in a very serious transformational phase. And what we have to do is make certain we protect our core values. And our core values are really in original content. And I believe that the investigative part of that is the most important part. Because what just about anyone can do is, you know, a press release and document that and put that into print or put that on the web. But when you go in and find out about, you know, whether it's City Hall or it's the educational system or it's crime or it's pollution, it's the environment, when you go in and you research or investigate the powers and the authority over those areas, that's when you're really doing a public service. And that's our mission. That's what we cannot lose. And we won't lose that. And frankly, it's a great business decision to make because it is what will separate us. I say this to my son often, who's 17, when he goes to the web for his homework. I want to know who the sources are. And I don't get a great answer, by the way. But you know, this is the thing, it's just like anything in life. Who is saying what? You know, who are they? Do they have the authority? Do they have the background for that comment? So I think that's what newspapers in America have, that they will have forever, no matter what the format is they will have the prestige and the authority and the influence because of their strong original reporting.
I'd like to thank you. I'm over here.
Oh,
I'd like to thank you on behalf of the faculty and the students for a truly remarkable talk. I've heard a lot in the years I've been here. And one that I can remember was also very impressive was by a gentleman named Gregory Favre, who was at the time executive editor for McClatchy Papers. And he talked about, and also, by the way, the father of one of our students, Monica, he talked about the difficult decisions he had to make as an editor over the years, and talked about one very difficult choice he had to make that week. I wonder if you could give us some idea of a decision you've made in the last 2 or 3 years that has really stressed you, that has made you think hard, made you put your values-centered leadership into practice.
Let's see here. I think it would be around the budget process, Bob, because you know, we are in, as I was saying, this very difficult time right now with the decline in ad revenue from the traditional source, primarily classified advertising. Classified represents probably 40% of our overall revenues. And we're in a steep decline across the industry in the United States. So we're making some very tough decisions around the budget. We were just having lunch here discussing, you know, what resources mean to a company and how, in the end, they translate through the budget to actions. So I would say that the decisions around that the work that has to be done to navigate through and to determine which cuts we are going to make. Because what ends up happening is, you know, it's just like the state budget or the federal budget. You know, each area is so strong, so whether it's news or advertising circulation, in its belief system about why it needs to have what it needs to have. And you could make a strong rationale that everything that's being said is correct. And yet you have to go in, and that's what we're doing now, and you have to make the cuts. And we try to do the cuts that we are doing with the best judgment possible to make the least pain to the employee and to the product. But I struggle with it mightily because, you know, again, service to the company, it's the right thing to do, but it's extremely difficult. And I would think that those are some of the hardest decisions I've had to make in my career, are over some of what we're having to do right now with the budget.
Janis, I also wanted to thank you for an extraordinary and very personal talk. I very much appreciate it. Part of what you talked about was the difficulty of being a woman, not only in your industry, but a woman in any industry that rises to the top. We have, this year at the Graduate School of Management, about 43% of our MBA students are women. And we also produce an annual census of top leaders in California business, and there aren't very many women who get there. Wondering if you would give any advice to both the men and the women students and graduates and to the business community about what you think will be necessary to allow those men and women, but especially women who want to move to the top of their organizations and industry in California. What do we have to do differently?
Well, that's a great question, and an extreme passion of mine, which would be women, just helping them. I think we have a lot of work to do, and in some ways, I feel like I could close my eyes and it's still 1975. And it can be very depressing. If you look at the reports that come out, there's a group in Catalyst, I think it is, in New York, who produces the results of women's pay and where they are in organizations, and it's not a pretty picture. And in my industry, when I go to our national functions for newspapers, I walk in and there are very few women, and again, particularly women of newspapers of this size. The answer, I think, is about, first and foremost, of course, is about education, providing the right kind of education so that that's there, to leverage off of. The other thing is that women have to be given opportunities in areas of P&L. And what happens too often is women are set aside for HR or law. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you need P&L and you need to prove yourself with, strong financial performance and accountability. And it's that old chicken and egg thing. Well, if you don't give the woman a chance, then how can she prove it? And I remember sitting on a stage in New York City with an organization, which now organization, on behalf of Times Mirror many years ago, and Katharine Graham was seated next to me, and Kathy Black, who is head of Hearst now, and Katharine Graham, of course, was publisher of the Washington Post. And I remember Katharine Graham at the time saying there were not enough women in the pipeline, and so if they're not in the pipeline, then when the jobs become available, then they don't have that opportunity. And unfortunately, that's still true today. And I think you have to risk it. You have to risk it. I'm absolutely colorblind, and I don't see color. I don't see gender. And I mean, everybody's different. But what I look for is people that are accountable to results, whether it's for the quality journalism, the advertising, or the circulation. Are they performance-oriented, and can they produce the results anticipated? So if a woman has a chance to produce, then she will. If you look at law and medicine, there are many women now, I think actually a higher percent in graduating from law and medicine, but that works more singular. It's when you get into management ranks that women have trouble. And I think some of it has to do with a perception by men that women can't be in a strong authoritative authority. I hear this about Hillary Clinton all the time, whether or not that the other countries of this world will look to her, nations will look to her and see her as having the gravitas necessary. But until you have a woman there to prove it, and I don't know what the answer is. I just think we have to keep fighting. Yes.
Thank you very much for sharing your creed with us. That's a valuable piece that we'll all take with us. In a recent Fortune magazine article on the Washington Post, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Warren Buffett was quoted as saying, and I'm paraphrasing, that the newspaper industry is dead. And if Warren was here today, what would you tell him? What would you tell him about the newspaper industry in response to his comment?
Right. I would tell him that he was wrong, for starters, but that I respect I respect the fact that he might have an alternative point of view, but I don't agree. I think that when you're as strong and powerful as the newspaper industry has been in this country for as long as we have, there are many people waiting to see that top dog fall. And I'm not suggesting that about him, but it's easy to get on the bandwagon and just figure out a way to beat it down. I don't believe it for a minute. I really do believe that what makes this country great has a lot to do with freedom, and freedom's based on, knowledge and information and access to that, and that's what newspapers provide. And what people don't realize sometimes is that in radio stations and television stations, there's a feed, and it's not original content. They're recycling it. And there's a huge difference between a recycled piece of material and something that is original. And the original work is what does create something like Watergate. And we just did a wonderful series on farm workers who need to be protected with better insurance up here in the forest workers, excuse me, not farm workers, forest workers coming up from Mexico. If we didn't write that story, the legislation that is now going through the California legislature would not be happening. So I just don't believe it. I'll never believe it. What I am concerned about is our, that we need to move over, and we very much need to get over to the website. I think the consumer's king, and I'm a big fan of capitalism, and I think it's built on the premise that the consumer reigns, and it's very powerful. We have to remain humble to that. If the consumer's habits are evolving, and they're looking for this, news 24 hours, 7 days a week, we need to be there with that. We need to do a much better job with breaking our news on time and with being vital, and our websites need to function better, and they need to have better navigation capability. So we just need to get on and get moving faster and more aggressively. But I don't believe we're dead, not at all.
Hi, over here, other side. First and foremost, I'd like to just say thank you very much for the stories of your own life that you shared with us. That was very, very well received. Recently, in one of our classes, Group Dynamics class, we talked a little bit about communication between men and women in particular, and the difficulties that arise. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about communication, the difficulties that are in your organization, and how to keep those channels open.
That's great. I'm only laughing because I see some of the men that work for me sitting over here. So I'm thinking, maybe you want to ask them about that. No. Well, I'll tell you a quick story. I once worked with this woman who was a PhD. She was with an international psychologist who worked for a firm, RHR International. They worked worldwide with top executives. I was at the LA Times, and we hired her, and she worked with the senior team in the advertising department, which I was running, to find their strengths and weaknesses. And she taught me a lot about the dynamic between a man and a woman when it comes to business. And she said that women often don't realize the amount of power that they have, and men don't realize it either. But that when a man looks at a woman, he either sees his mother, his wife, or his daughter. And those relations are very important to that man. And so, and that, the back and forth of that. So she said, don't ever underestimate your power as a woman. And I think, I don't think of it as a femininity deal. I'm glad there's a big difference between us, frankly. But I like the idea that I might be able to help a man in a way that might actually help him with his own wife or his own mother or his own daughter someday. Because my style is very much like a woman's. I'm much more talking, I want them to work together. I'm a big advocate of getting along, and that doesn't mean everybody has to be happy and nice all the time, but I really insist upon things that maybe some men wouldn't, having to do with, will you go talk to him? Why are you coming to me? I want you two to work it out, and then we'll figure it out. And I have very high standards when it comes to ethics in terms of how you treat one another. And it's much more of a group kind of culture at the highest level with the executive team. And frankly, I'm sorry to say this, but you're asking me, so I have to tell the truth. I think women have less ego. And one of the biggest problems I face with men is ego. And it just takes over. And when the ego takes over, decisions are not always right because they're on behalf of that ego instead of the company. So I try to guard against that. Yeah.
Thank you again for your speech. It was really enjoyed it, as I'm sure everyone else did as well. To follow on one of my peers' questions and your response to it a few minutes ago regarding online and paper-based newspapers, I personally prefer paper-based newspapers. I like having a morning coffee, reading the paper, and relaxing. I realize that is quickly going out of style. In light of that, and in light of your comments earlier, how soon do you think it will completely go out of style? How soon will it completely switch over to the online? And recognizing, of course, that Sacramento Bee has a phenomenal online site as well. And one final thing, how does values-based leadership relate into that? Is it easier on one versus the other? Are there drawbacks or benefits?
I'm sorry, on one or the other, you mean print or online?
Print or online version, yes.
Well, to your first question, how long? If I could answer that question, I'd be so rich.
As a rough estimate.
I don't see it as a definitive line. What I would say to you is, I think it's like all things in life. If you look at society, society is made up of, those that are interested in news and information, actively pursuing it, let's say 18 to 70. So along that line, it's a gradual continuum. And so you have people who enjoy the print product and some who enjoy the web. And that's why we have at the newspaper what we call an audience-based model. Audience meaning we want to please the audience for what it is they want. So we need to be prepared to have a full line of goods and services and products across so that we can, that's why we have several websites, that's why we have all kinds of editions, because what we're trying to do is find where you want us and be able to hit you there. So I believe that the newspaper will be around probably for several more decades. Whether or not we'll have the same penetration into the market or the same vitality is, I don't think that that's true, but I do think that it will be there because there are still people who choose that format. And they like it in the morning with their coffee. And those are not just old people like myself, but they're younger folks. Now, on the other hand, the online's picking up a lot of momentum. And so we need to be there with it. And I guess I would take you back to books. And I would say that, books came around, television came, there was radio and then television. We still have books. People enjoy the experience of books. And I think that's a private and intimate experience you have with a book when you read. And I think similarly with a newspaper, it's a different experience than when you go to the web. It just is. So I think they'll be around for several decades. And then in terms of the value-centered leadership and how does it play out, I think values are values. So whether it's the online or it's the newspaper, our value is core, and it's about quality journalism, and it's about investigative reporting and original content, accuracy, balance, and fairness, and that exists whether it's online or in the paper.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Again, thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it on a career and personal level. I had two questions, and the first one is, what is your take or your opinion, or do you see a risk in that you just talked about the declining revenues from the paper-based newspaper, and the business outcome is you see a lot of mergers and conglomeration of these news sources. Is there a risk to the independence when they're controlled by like one corporation or a few large corporations? In terms of like, we've seen things like Watergate investigation. But maybe you wouldn't have such freedom of the press in a large corporate conglomerated world. What's your take on that?
That's a really good question. All your questions are very good. I believe it's something we need to be vigilant upon, that we need to visit that on a daily basis and be vigilant. But I really believe that a smart business, whether it's consolidated or separated or merged or acquired, does not lose its sense of its core value. And the core value of independence has to be there. Many people don't understand how this works with a newspaper that, myself even as publisher, The editor of the newspaper reports to me, and the editor of the editorial pages reports to me. But I don't go in and talk to them about this or that on the paper. They need to remain independent, and similarly, even their reporters need to remain independent from them. And once you have a person going in to provoke a point of view on something, you've lost your most important quality and value. So I really don't believe that good newspaper companies that will be successful companies, both historically and into the future, will compromise on that. And they'd be crazy to, because then it would just be payback time by the consumer. And if I thought that was happening, I wouldn't work at that company. And they wouldn't want me to. And I don't think that the really fine reporters in this country will work for a situation like that.
And I had just one quick, more trivial question, but I've wondered about it for years. Many of the major newspapers, I think of names like the Times or the Post or the Chronicle, but where does the name the Bee come from?
The history is that that was a name that was Eleanor McClatchy and the McClatchy family made a determination about having to do with an industrious insect, which would be the bee.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Actually, Janice, I have one final question. Thank you very, very much for being here. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I work for public radio, and as you know, we are a content-driven organization, and like you, one of our core values is building, producing, and providing to the community we serve quality content. Producing quality content takes money, as you well know. So how do you, as an organization, as a leader, what specific revenue strategies are you using at your level to support and enhance the kind of reporting that will ultimately drive circulation and readership? Any comments you have in that regard would be interesting.
Yeah, you know, it's very hard today because of this natural decline on the print side. I think what's most important is diversification. So, for example, we have a very strong direct mail product. It goes out every Tuesday, and it reaches 550,000 of the households in Sacramento. So we can say to Rayleigh's, for example, you can have 35–40% penetration with a newspaper. The remaining 60% go into our direct mail package on Tuesday, and we will give you 100% penetration. And that business is a $15 million business, as an example. We also have an Hispanic product. We also have niche products that we produce that are derivatives of our core. And we have new online products. We just launched a mom's website, which I'm really excited about, last week. And we're looking at an entertainment website for younger folks, like all of you. And so I think you have to go and you have to diversify. I think you have to explore and exploit all opportunities. And it really requires a mindset of innovation. And we need to do a better job innovating and not relying upon the tradition of our strength, because we have to provoke these new areas. And I think what we have that is unique is we have amazing relationships in this marketplace, amazing with all of our advertisers, and we have a very strong brand. It's trusted. And so when we go out to talk about any one of these derivative products, people are interested to know that it's a quality product and a new way, a new entree. We must develop those at a better speed, a faster speed, and more of them, period.
I want to thank Janis for her inspiring words. This is exactly the right kind of a talk for those of us who are about to start a new year, to think about these kinds of values as we struggle with the decisions that we have to make in our classrooms and our businesses here at our university. So I want to thank you very much for your thoughtfulness. I have a little something from us, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you all for coming and taking time out of your day to be with us today. I wish you all a very good year.